Good afternoon. What a treat to be back together in Mondale Hall for a big event. This is very exciting. Welcome, students, faculty, friends, to the University of Minnesota Law School's inaugural Matheson Lecture in Corporate Governance. Woo! I'm Gary Jenkins. I'm the Dean of the Law School, and I want to start by telling you a little bit about this newly established lecture series, which is made possible thanks to the generosity of Dean and Diana Matheson. Dean is a member of the class of 2008, and Dean and Diana are watching. They're here with us in spirit. They're in California, and they're on Zoom, and we say hello to them. The lecture advances the mission of our corporate institute, and it pays tribute to Dean's father, the legendary Professor John Matheson. I want to thank them for their thoughtful gift. I want to welcome all the members of the Matheson family who are here today. Now, as many of you know, John, who holds the Alumni Distinguished Professorship in Law, is a beloved figure in our community. His contributions to Minnesota law, to legal education, and the state are immense. He joined the law school 39 years ago and continues to make a huge impact on our students and our mission in so many ways. He is faculty director of the law school's Corporate Institute. He's also a member of the American Law Institute. It's no secret that John is an extraordinary teacher and mentor. When I talk to students and alumni about faculty who have made a difference in their lives, the name John Matheson always comes up. Alumni across decades remember with fondness and gratitude learning corporate and business law from Professor Matheson. As a teacher, he's been the law school's Kenyon Award recipient for excellence in teaching, a record 5 times. He is also the first law professor to be honored by the university with their outstanding contribution to Graduate and Professional Education Award. And he's been inducted into the Academy of Distinguished Teachers at the university. John, we are lucky to have you as part of our Minnesota law community. Thank you for making such a difference in the lives of our students, our alumni, and your colleagues. Thank you. Now, additionally, this lecture also highlights the work of Minnesota Law's Corporate Institute, which, as I mentioned, is led by John, but also Professor Kristen Hickman and its executive director, Emily Buchholz, class of 2010. And under their collective leadership, the Corporate Institute creates and maintains valuable partnerships with the Twin Cities business community. It provides hands-on learning opportunities for our students and contributes to Minnesota's law's commitment to leadership development. The Corporate Institute prepares students interested in business careers to lead through our business law clinic, our corporate externship program, and corporate fellowship program, as well as bringing terrific speakers to campus and supporting our JD MBA joint degree program with the Carlson School of Management. Here at Minnesota Law, through our teaching, our research, our engagement, our convening power, we help address and understand a wide range of critical local, national, and global issues. And there is no doubt that the global public health pandemic we've experienced for the past several months has challenged communities and organizations across the globe. These are unprecedented times, and this is an unprecedented crisis. And in unprecedented times, uncertainties, we know that lawyers are helping organizations respond. Lawyers are helping them navigate through these challenging times. Lawyer leaders are making a difference, as they always do. And one of those Minnesota law lawyer leaders is here with us today. And we are honored to have our alum and friend, Peter Carter, class of '91 here. He is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary at Delta Airlines. And today he'll be giving a talk called Navigating Uncharted Skies, Corporate Leadership in a Time of Crisis. Now, we didn't invite Peter today just because we knew we could save the law school money on airfare. No, we did it because Peter has been directly involved in helping to guide and lead one of America's largest corporations, a Fortune 100 entity, and one of Fortune's top 50 most admired companies through an unprecedented set of challenges. As Chief Legal Officer, Peter oversees the airline's legal, regulatory, compliance, government affairs, and corporate strategy groups worldwide. He also serves on the Delta Leadership Committee, and he advocates for fair and open skies, pro-consumer international joint ventures, and smart regulation. He engages with government stakeholders on aviation policy matters in the US, Mexico, Korea, UK, China, and EU on competition policy, alliances, privacy, and compliance. Prior to joining Delta, Peter was a partner right here in town at Dorsey and Whitney, where he chaired the firm's policy committee and the Securities Litigation and Enforcement Practice Group. He is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and has been recognized by numerous organizations and publications, including being honored with a Burton Award for public interest, and he was named Antitrust Lawyer of the Year in 2013 by the Best Lawyers in America. He serves on the boards of Delta Airlines Foundation, the Alliance Theater, the Chick-fil-A Foundation, the United Way of Greater Atlanta, and the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Before I turn the mic over to Peter, I'd like to invite all of you to join us at a reception in Auerbach Commons following the lecture. It's right upstairs on the main floor in Mondale Hall. We'll also have Stein Plaza and Terrace, which is adjacent, open for those who wish to go outside, in which you're allowed to take off your mask if you do that. And thankfully, it looks like the weather is cooperating with us. So with that, I think we're all settled in. So I will say, welcome to Minnesota Law, Peter. We are so honored to have you here today. Please join me.
Dean Jenkins, thank you for that kind introduction. It is absolutely wonderful to be back in Minnesota among so many friends and to be back at the law school. It's been years since I've been in this building, and I don't know if I have good memories or bad memories of this room. I have good memories because Professor Matheson taught business corporations here, but I think this was also the site of numerous exams. I especially want to thank Dean Jenkins for the invitation to deliver the inaugural Matheson Lecture in Corporate Governance. It is an honor. And what a wonderful way for Dean and Diana to honor Dean's father, John Matheson. And it's wonderful, I can see the name tags and Judy's here and children and grandchild, I believe, all here to honor John Matheson. I also want to thank you, John, for all you've done for the law school and all you've done for the community this last 40 years. And you've just started. A few words about Professor Matheson. Professor Matheson, we all know, is an outstanding teacher of corporate law. It's not an easy task, by the way, to bring corporate law and corporate governance to life. He has done that now for a couple generations of lawyers. Professor Matheson, I think, is a rare combination of three things, and I, by the way, have been the beneficiary of all three of these things. First, Professor Matheson is a thought leader and a scholar who literally wrote the book on Minnesota business corporations. And any lawyer in the world who has advised a Minnesota business corporation has had to rely on the scholarship of John Matheson. The second thing is that John Matheson doesn't just write and teach. He also is a practitioner. About 10% of his time, he told me earlier today. And I think it's fair to say that as of counsel to Kaplan Stranges, he has been asked to advise some of our nation's largest corporations on sensitive matters of great consequence. My guess is he doesn't talk about any of those things because he can't. But I happen to know he's done that over the years. And I think that's provided a pragmatism that informs his students of how business lawyers think about and solve real life business problems. And then third, and perhaps most importantly, because we're in the law school, is that John Matheson has a natural teaching ability and a charisma. He has taught hundreds, maybe thousands, because he takes double classes I saw earlier today, of students to become and help them to become business lawyers. And he's done this in a sustained way for 40 years with enthusiasm and passion. And we know that because he's been recognized 5 times with the Stanley Kenyon Award, which I believe, at least when I was here, the students vote the winner of that award. I don't know if that's still the case, but on a personal note, Professor Matheson was both my corporation's professor and my wife's corporation's professor. She was the better student for sure. And I did have the privilege of working with Professor Matheson on some matters in private practice. John, thank you for all you've done and for the privilege of being able to honor you today at this lecture. Today, I will be sharing with all of you how Delta Airlines navigated the crisis associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope to give you a sense of how we led through the pandemic, how the legal team participated in that leadership, how the board governed the company during that crisis, and I'm also going to briefly address how we were thinking about ESG during the crisis. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I understand that the pandemic has impacted each and every one of us in this room and in the world, frankly, in substantial ways, and that many of us have experienced loss and heartache because of this pandemic. My focus on how Delta Airlines, a business, has navigated the crisis is not intended in any way to minimize the personal toll the pandemic has had on our families and our communities. I'd like to set the context for everyone because so much time has passed, although as you look at it, the way the calendars work, the months work, not that much time has passed. On January 23rd, 2020, Wuhan, China was placed under quarantine because in 2 days, 13 people died and an additional 300 people were sickened due to what was then known as the novel coronavirus. At Delta, we immediately started to monitor the situation. We believed two things right off the bat. One, we thought that this was going to be isolated to China. The second thing is that we believed that the public health authorities would be able to isolate this so that it would not become truly a pandemic, and that they would isolate it the way they had MERS and SARS and avian flu. By the way, this is why even before the pandemic, if you go and look at our risk factors as a public company, we always identified the possibility of a virus that could impact our business. But we never believed as an enterprise that it could be a pandemic that in fact basically shut down the airline industry. On February 2nd, 2020, which seems again like a lifetime ago, even though it's not that many months ago, the Trump administration imposed travel restrictions to and from China in order to protect the US from the virus. And you may remember he was criticized for that at the time, for being xenophobic. We believed still at that time that the virus would be isolated to China. At the time, our balance sheet was strong. We had more than sufficient liquidity. And China is such a small part of Delta's business and the US industry that frankly we thought we were still going to have a strong year. If any of you have flown on Valentine's Day with Delta, you'll know that it's a very special day for us because it has been the year where we have shared profits with our employees, again, before the pandemic. And in February of 2020, on the 14th, we shared a record $1.6 billion of profit sharing from 2019 with our employees. That's basically like 2 months of pay for each of our employees. At that time, we had employee celebrations throughout the system. We felt very bullish. We really thought we were going to have the best 2020, or the best year ever in the history of the airline, based on how good January had been and how good the first 2 weeks of February. Even with what was going on in China, we believed that. Of course, all of that quickly changed for Delta Airlines and for, frankly, everybody, because by March, a first case of COVID-19 had been positively identified in the US, in Italy, in Germany, in Japan, in Taiwan, and South Korea. By the 13th of March, which of course happened to be Friday the 13th, unfortunately, President Trump declared COVID-19 a national emergency and banned travel for all non-US citizens from the UK and Europe traveling to the United States. By the way, that restriction exists to this very day. It's being lifted on the 8th of November, which we are very grateful has finally come. Countries around the world closed their borders overnight, and the focus of our international flights went from business travel and people going to London to see Big Ben to repatriation flights. And what repatriation means is we were bringing Americans back, and then anybody from another country was leaving the country. It was almost like something out of a 1920s movie. People were all going to their homelands. This was the end of the week. We all remember when the NBA canceled their season. This was the end of that week. This was the week that youth sports was canceled. This was the week where students were sent home from school. It also marked the day where we saw our demand disappear overnight. It won't surprise anyone that fear is the enemy of the airline industry. If people are afraid to fly, they're not going to buy tickets. And people were afraid They were sincerely afraid to get on an airplane. I'm sure all of you in this room stopped traveling. Very few people traveled once March 13th hit until many, many months later. So people stopped buying tickets, which means we had no cash coming into the door. At the same time, people were canceling their flights, which means we had to issue refunds. This was happening in droves in every single market we served. The enormity of the situation hit us almost immediately. Our revenues disappeared. Our stock price went from $63 a share to $19 a share almost overnight. Our largest investor, which we were very proud of, Warren Buffett, went from being a bullish owner of Delta Airlines to selling his entire stake. And by early April, Delta Airlines was burning over $100 million each and every day. $100 million each and every day. We concluded quickly that the airline industry, by the way, it wasn't just Delta that was going through this, all the carriers in the United States were going through this, was in the midst of an existential crisis. In the spring, we were flying empty aircraft. Everybody stayed home. And our second quarter revenue that year tumbled 90% from 2019. We knew as a team we had to move fast and focus not on what we could not control, but on what, in fact, we could do. The lesson of that moment, by the way, was when everything's going badly, which of course it was, and there's nothing you can do to stop it because we were powerless against the pandemic, we needed to focus on what we could do. Under Ed Bastian's leadership, we identified two areas of focus, and we became laser focused on these areas. One was protecting our people, and the other was protecting our cash. And all of this was done with an understanding that we needed to do these things without sacrificing our future. We wanted to make sure that our short-term decisions didn't inhibit our ability to recover when the recovery came. Because we all believed, by the way, that the pandemic would end. Now, we all thought it was going to be a 4-month, I think at first we thought 3 months and then 4, and anyways, we're still in it, of course. Protecting our people and protecting our cash became the guiding principles of the leadership team and our board. It became the filter and focus through which we made every decision during the pandemic. By the way, it shouldn't surprise anyone, I hope, that our number one priority at Delta Airlines before the pandemic, during the pandemic, today, is safety. That's the number one thing that we focus on as an organization. We viewed protecting the health of our people as a natural extension of that priority. And for us, it meant, since our employees had to come to work every day, they needed to feel safe, they needed to feel healthy, they needed to feel taken care of. Because we've always believed that if we took care of our employees, they would take care of our customers, and the customers would take care of our shareholders. At Delta, we call that the virtual circle. But protecting our people meant we needed to understand this virus that nobody understood. And then we needed to be decisive about imposing business practices that protected our employees. And when I say decisive, we're such a complex organization. Pre-pandemic, it would take meetings and committees and process for a certain decision to be implemented. We couldn't afford to do that. We needed to be emboldened to make quick decisions without, frankly, the process that we had grown accustomed to. I'll give you an example of one thing we did as a team pretty quickly. Who remembers that there was a little bit of just a misunderstanding about the power of masks? Initially, it was sort of don't wear a mask and save the mask for the medical professions. And we were all very confused. But then at some point, and I can't remember who exactly articulated this, we had put a medical advisory panel together that helped us with this. But at some point, it became crystal clear that masks stop the spread. As soon as that was the case, we imposed a mask requirement for all our employees and for all of the customers of Delta Airlines. Now today, the FAA has a requirement that everybody wear masks in airports and on aircraft. But we had done that before the federal government, some weeks before that, based on just what we had learned and understood after we went to school to understand the power of masks. Now at the time, masks were hard to find, and our employees were amazing because they just found masks. They found ways to wear masks every day to work. And it was one small way that we could, again, help our people feel protected. We also created a testing program where each and every employee could be tested at least one time a week. We had 53 on-site testing centers, and this was in partnership with CVS and Quest. And it became so important for our employees because when we first started this testing program, we didn't know that folks could spread COVID through being asymptomatic. Nobody really understood that. But this testing program, all of a sudden people were coming to work completely asymptomatic and testing positive. Well, if they tested positive at Delta, they'd be sent home and quarantined with full pay for 14 days. But our medical advisors told us the fact that we were doing that for our employees as often as they wanted, providing tests, we saved lives. Because those folks who didn't know they were COVID positive. We also set up 18 vaccination sites throughout the country. Today, 90% of our employees are vaccinated. Again, it was a way we felt that we would protect our people, make them feel safe in the face of COVID. I want to talk a little bit about protecting our cash, because that was really all about ensuring that our balance sheet was robust and that we had enough cash in the door to withstand basically what I said earlier, burning $100 million of cash a day over a period of time. We knew that it was going to be an unknown period of time, and we knew that we were going to be generating substantial losses. So that was the reason why that became such a critical focus. I want to talk now about the role of the law department in helping execute around protecting our people and protecting our cash. The law department at Delta Airlines is like most law departments in large corporations. It is a partner to the business. It helps facilitate, accelerate, and drive business objectives. We are one of the few handful of functions that has historical knowledge because, business leaders turn over and are moved into different areas. We have visibility across the entire organization. We use the analogy or the metaphor of being like an FAA tower. We can see everything from where we are. My team is extremely versatile, extremely smart. Lawyers are fast learners, and the lawyers at Delta Airline, the legal team there, they're all fast learners. Eager to jump into new challenges. And lawyers and my team, they're great problem solvers. So you think about Delta, you think about the fact we're in a crisis, and we've got this great resource, the law department. I am proud to say that these attributes proved to be invaluable to Delta during the crisis. And I'll give you an example because we talked a little bit about the fact that we needed to get smart about the virus. Who did the CEO turn to get smart about the virus? The legal team. I think Ed Bastian understood right away that these are folks who tend to be able to learn fast, and they're rough and ready, and they're able to talk to other professionals, the medical profession. And so we had a group of people that was working with our medical advisory panel in order to really understand what's the latest study on the latest therapeutics. When are the vaccines coming out? What does the testing supply look like? All of those issues were issues that were driven and handled by the law department. What that meant is that the law department had to basically, like the entire enterprise, take the priorities that we had carefully set for 2020, in essence, throw them aside and immediately change its focus. Another example is anyone who's flown Delta knows that we're very proud of the Delta Care Clean Standard. This clean standard is one where we disinfect every aircraft for every flight. Well, the thing about a disinfectant on a flight is that before we can use a disinfectant, we needed to get EPA approval. And by the way, it's not easy to get EPA to approve anything quickly, ever. Someone on my team who had zero EPA experience, was not an environmental lawyer, had not learned from Professor Klaas, was asked, we got to get this approved. We have a new disinfectant that we want to use each and every day. And she partnered with outside counsel, went to Washington, talked to the EPA, and that now today is the disinfectant that's been approved to be used each and every day on each and every turn of each and every flight. I mentioned earlier that the law department led the creation of our testing centers. It led the creation of the vaccine centers. It was critical in really creating partnerships with organizations that we had never created partnerships with before. The airline industry has its list of vendors like any industry. We've got Boeing, we've got Airbus, we've got GE, we've got Honeywell, there's many, many others. They all became almost irrelevant. What we needed to do is learn how to partner with organizations that we had never worked with before. CVS, Quest, the Mayo Clinic, Emory. One of the things we did, which was, I think, very exciting, we were trying to reopen international travel. And the US government was certainly not willing to just reopen. In fact, they still haven't. They're going to be opening it soon. We decided to start with the CDC and Mayo a pilot program that would allow Americans to go to Italy. We needed the Italian government's support of this. And what we did is we created a testing protocol where if you provided a negative test 72 hours before your flight and you agreed to an antigen test at the airport, which we set up the facility, and you got a negative test there, you could go to Italy. We started that last Christmas. 5,000 people did that. Meanwhile, Mayo was studying the results of those folks. And then, by the way, once you land in Italy, there's a third test. Well, that test proved, by the way, that if you had those two tests before you went to Italy, your chances of getting COVID or testing positive for COVID were something like 1 in a million. And that ended up becoming a study that was published in the Mayo Proceeding, and it was something that we went to Washington and said, look, you can reopen the international borders. You can do it with a PCR test. You can do it this way, which is going to be one of the things we expect the government will do when they reopen on November 8th. The lesson for the law department was that as lawyers, we needed to think about what we do broadly beyond our area of expertise. And if we saw an opportunity that the crisis provided, we needed to try to help solve, to help drive. We needed to be willing to jump into areas that had nothing to do with our substantive expertise because there was nobody. There was nobody. If it wasn't going to be us, it may not get done. We had to co-create and drive solutions and drive them hard, all in a very dynamic environment, and embracing all along the way the creation of unorthodox partnerships. I know that all sounds simple, but it was really intense. And my team, I could not be more proud because, what's interesting about lawyers is we all are very proud of our expertise. But, that expertise can hold you back. And it was just delightful to see as members of the team took on new challenges and were able to do things and drive outcomes that they never thought imaginable. While I'm talking about the law department, though, I would be remiss if I didn't address the impact that the pandemic had on the team, because like every organization, they were working from home. And they were working from home with the stress of managing family in a world where many of the support structures that we were all relying on were missing. Schools were closed, childcare centers were closed. The family that they would rely on to come and take care of their children were not available because of the fear of COVID. From their home offices, my team was basically working around the clock during this crisis, helping Delta meet the challenge. They rose to the occasion, there's no doubt, and they've been recognized many times for doing that, but the stress was real, and it continues to this day. And sadly, two members of my department died during COVID. One from COVID, and one had some sort of an aneurysm along the way. And there's no question in my mind that the stress of just the world that we were all operating in was part of that. The stress is so real, not just with my team, but throughout Delta after what we've been through. And I'd suggest that all of you and your families have probably felt that same stress, that it's required us as an organization to make our number one priority for 2021, which we're almost done with, to be taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other. Well, what do I mean by that? Every staff meeting that I have or any of my leaders have with their teams begins with one question: how are you? How are you? And it ends with, how's your team doing? Right? We want to make sure that everybody is checked in on and doing okay. On Fridays, we have a all-hands call every Friday at 1 o'clock. And the last thing I say during that call is, I just want to remind you, do one thing this weekend that gives you joy. Just one thing. You hate to be that, I think, straightforward about something like that, but we have found at Delta that it's really important and necessary. There's not an endless supply of resilience in the world, and the teams burned a lot of it to get through that initial time, but it is a slog, and so we need to recharge and be ready for the full recovery. I want to talk about protecting our cash, because that was the business challenge we had, burning the $100 million of cash each and every day. We did three things as an organization, all of which I'm proud to say the law department was leading and played a critical role in. We knew, by the way, that we couldn't sell our core assets, like airplanes. We were going to need them once we got out of this. So what we did first was just to step back, we were fortunate. We had a strong balance sheet. Before the pandemic, we were not an airline that leased airplanes. We owned our airplanes. So the first thing we did was we accessed the capital markets, and we securitized every asset that we had available to Delta Airlines. Every aircraft, every gate, every slot, every route, even our frequent flyer program was securitized. What that meant is in just a few short months, we raised $25 billion, which was extremely critical for us as an organization. You can imagine the impact that had on my capital markets and securities team. We literally had 24-hour clock shifts to prepare the documents associated with the various capital market transactions. So we'd have one team kind of working the day, one team working the night, We knew that without cash, the airline wasn't going to survive. So we needed to change the way we worked. Now, I will tell you that once all those got closed, we sent everybody on a trip and we shut off their emails because we didn't want them, we wanted them to, again, recharge. The second thing we did is we immediately went to Washington, D.C. as an industry to seek support from the prior administration and Congress. And within 3 weeks, so remember, the 13th is when it hit the fan. By the 24th of March, then President Trump signed into law the first CARES Act. That was passed by the U.S. Senate 99-0, which is amazing because I don't think that has ever happened since and may never happen again. But anyways, 99-0. And in the end, with both the Trump administration and the Biden administration providing support, more than $50 billion in grants and loans was provided to the U.S. airline industry. What that meant is for basically those 3 weeks and weeks leading up to the extensions of what we call the CARES Act, my team was in Washington. I and others were on the phone constantly talking through how things needed to be structured because we had another crisis called 9/11, obviously, and following that, the airline industry did receive support, but that particular support was all loans. And every airline after that had gone through bankruptcy because unfortunately it institutionalized into their balance sheet some debt service that meant the airlines could not survive. We didn't want to make that mistake again. We wanted to make sure that airlines could emerge from this crisis with strong balance sheets and they wouldn't be forced into a bankruptcy situation. In any event, I want to publicly thank both administrations and the Congress for their critical support of the airline industry during our time of need. We really could not have gotten through this without government support. The third thing we did was we needed to do everything we could to reduce our operating costs. The goal was we wanted to reduce it by at least 50%. We, of course, wanted to do even better with revenues down 90%. We did this by parking 600 aircraft in the desert and asking our employees to take unpaid leaves of absence. What's amazing is that we said to our employees, we're in this crisis, we don't want to lay people off, but the only way we know we won't have to lay people off is if enough of you take unpaid leaves of absence. So out of our 90,000 employees, 40,000 employees took unpaid leaves of absence. And what's wonderful is because of that, which was pure sacrifice, because of that, Delta Airlines did not have to lay off a single employee because of the crisis, not one. Really amazing. The other thing we had to do was restructure many of our significant agreements with our vendors, and that was really a moment for the legal team to shine. Our legal team had to look at thousands of contracts, not 10 or 20, thousands of contracts, and either terminate, renegotiate, or amend the terms. Because part of it is we weren't going to be focused on all the initiatives we thought we were focused on survival. And part of it is we didn't have the cash to do all those things, the things those contracts required us to do. The best example of that would be in 2020, we were expected to take delivery of a couple dozen Airbus aircraft. Those are significant capital assets, obviously, at an airline. And we needed to tell them unilaterally that we would not be accepting delivery of those aircraft. You can imagine that an aircraft manufacturer has expansive contractual protections. Expansive. We had no choice. There was nothing else we could do. Ultimately, they had to accept the fact that we couldn't take delivery because we didn't have the cash to pay for those aircraft. And ultimately, they, like a business partner, came and helped us to restructure our order book. Law firms were also great help because I reached out to all the firms and said, we can't pay you until the end of the year. And maybe then I'm going to ask for more time, but we don't have the cash. And firms work for free. Firms were willing to wait to be paid. I'm proud to say every firm was paid in full. Lawyers here who work for some of those firms can appreciate that. The lesson we learned from all of that, because it's not obviously the way we want to work or like to work or was accustomed to working, was that during a real crisis, when the enterprise is at risk, the legal team needs to recalibrate the nature of acceptable legal risk that an organization can face. Contractual compliance in that context becomes a consideration, but not the only consideration. And there's no question that at Delta Airlines, we did take on some additional legal risk. We also had to move quickly. Again, something that large corporations are not known for their swiftness. But we didn't have the luxury to take the time and consideration of the kind of depth of analysis that we might have been accustomed to during ordinary times. Process gave way to action. I've been focused on the role of the law department, and I could go on because I'm very proud of what they did, but I want to now move to the matter of governance, especially the role of our board and how our engagement with the board changed. We'd never been through a crisis with our board before, but we knew two things about our board. One is it's great. It's engaged. They work well together. They had worked well with us before the pandemic. And then the second thing was, as individuals, these were outstanding people, outstanding resources, all of whom had led crisis in their business or government careers. It included a former Secretary of Defense, the former head of the FAA, the current CEO of P&G, the former CEO of Home Depot. These are people who had relevant, deep experience managing through crisis. This recognition led us to approach the board with humility and openness because we knew they could not just provide oversight, but that they could actually help. They could roll up the sleeves and support us. It won't surprise anyone here that just about everything changed with respect to how we worked with our board during this period. Those of you who work with public company boards know that you put schedules years ahead, that you have certain topics that show up each particular board meeting. It might be ERM, it might be succession planning, strategy, long-term planning, capital allocation. For us, our governance schedule was completely pushed aside. This meant that rather than follow this cadence that we had typically followed in the past, the board was being asked to govern the needs of the day. And the needs of the day were quite serious. For us, this meant a couple things. One is we needed to be completely transparent. We couldn't sugarcoat a single thing with this board. We needed to tell them exactly how bad this was. We also needed to talk to the board about the problem to help them understand it such so they could talk through how we might solve the problem. And I say that because, you typically with a board would be proposing the solution, right? You don't necessarily want to have that conversation with your board, but we really wanted to talk the problem with the board if we were going to get them to actually engage and help. It also meant we needed to communicate with that board constantly, and we did. We had, in the early days, 2 board calls at least every week. And that's unusual, highly unusual. But we knew we needed to keep the board with us on this journey every step of the way. We didn't talk about allocation of capital because we didn't have any capital to allocate. We didn't talk about succession planning because the team was focused on solving the problem. The board understood what we needed to do, and I'll give you one concrete example. because cash was so important and we were going into capital markets, the capital market transactions with a number of different debt instruments. Our typical way of dealing with the board was each one of those, you'd first get finance committee approval, and then you'd get board approval. And you do them, basically in seriatim. Our board chair during one of our calls said, "It seems to me that it would really help you, the management team, if we could give you blanket approval." I mean, doesn't that tell you the board gets it, right? They fully understood what we needed. Huge vote of confidence for management to have the board do that. And a real sign that the board understood the criticality of the situation that we were in. The board moved at the speed required by the needs of the business, not the other way around. I want to say this again. The board moved at the speed required by the needs of the business and not the other way around. This made the world of difference for us in the midst of the crisis. The board also provided tremendous moral support because, by the way, we couldn't, well, I'll get to this. They made it clear that they were with us. I can't overemphasize how important it was to the Delta leadership team to know that they had our backs and that we weren't in this alone, right? When you think about crisis, think about having people alongside you that have been through it, right? Extremely powerful. They were not only available at a moment's notice, but they also joined us as leaders in accepting a pay cut. So one of the things our CEO did is said, "I'm not going to take a salary." And the rest of the leadership team took a 50% pay cut. And the board said, "We're going to join the CEO and we're not going to take a salary." Truly remarkable that they did that. And just such an indication, again, that they understood the criticality of the situation. Individual board members would reach out to all of us, call and say, "How are you doing?" They couldn't pay us, right, because there was no money to pay us. But at one point they gave each of us, and this might sound silly, but just a memento that, it was a vase that said, "We appreciate the commitment." And, even that was a powerful symbol that they were with us and supportive. But they also did something really critical because during the crisis, the management team was in the weeds, right? We were managing day-to-day the tactic of making sure we had enough cash and making sure our people were safe. And the board did a great job at the right time of seeing the horizon of the broader landscape and helping us as an organization adjust and lift our heads a little bit from that day in, day out. And I think the best example of that would be following the George Floyd murder and during the contentious election and the intense focus on Georgia during that election, our board helped us think about what is our role at Delta Airlines? What's the framework we need to use before we weigh in on political issues, which is something that now corporations are being asked to do. Our board also helped us think through and was extremely important in identifying the incredible stress that was coming through the pandemic and how that could impact our culture, how that could impact our recovery, and how as a result we needed as an organization coming out of the worst of the pandemic to fiercely focus on the health and well-being of our people to ensure continued future success. All of this brings me to ESG, and I've just got brief comments on ESG, and then we'll have time for questions, I hope. We all know that the expectations around ESG are elevated for companies today. And we've seen corporate governance evolve from a shareholder-centric model to one that places the health and resilience and long-term sustainability of the company at its center. So really now shareholders are one of many stakeholders that we need to focus on as an enterprise. COVID has taught us at Delta, though, that this new model of corporate governance is not static and set in stone, but rather at different times, we think you need to be focused on different stakeholders. And I think that the primacy of which stakeholder you might prioritize is going to be depending on the business challenges of the day. At Delta, for us, what that meant during COVID, it was, first of all, our commitment to ESG was not going to waver. We made a commitment before the pandemic to be a carbon neutral airline. That happened literally on the 14th of February, 2020. And we never wavered from that commitment, but we knew that we were going to have to do it differently during our own time frame. And ultimately, we did once the worst of COVID was behind us. But for us, really the main focus and the main stakeholder that we had to focus on was our employees. It was critical that they and their health and well-being was something that would receive, I think, our time and attention as leaders. And in some ways, we were obsessed with that. We believed it was the only way that ultimately we would be able to drive a full recovery. Obviously, cash, those are table stakes, right? Your investors require you to make sure that you're a liquid organization. But on the pure ESG front, that was the focus. In closing, I have three thoughts, and then we'll hopefully have time for questions. One, a dynamic risk that is not well understood and is potentially catastrophic is one that requires dynamic, resilient leadership by the board and the senior management teams. You cannot be cemented to the processes, no matter how great they were or are, of the past and the ways you worked in the past, but you've got to be willing to look at things differently and work differently. The second thought is we found at Delta that the speed of making decisions was critical. Because in the face of catastrophic risk, if we didn't make decisions quickly, promptly, if you didn't act promptly, we were going to be acted upon. And the results of that would not have been satisfactory to any of our stakeholders. We needed to go to Washington fast to avoid bankruptcies. We needed to access the capital markets quickly. The ability to make quick decisions is not naturally wired into an organization the size and scope of Delta Airlines. I think that we'll come out, and we are coming out of this pandemic, a more decisive organization, which is going to be more efficient in this post-pandemic marketplace. And then the last thing is crisis breeds community, and community brings strength. We learned this at Delta. We're closer to our board, to each other, to our teams, to the front lines, to everyone. We went through something together. And ultimately, this, I think, is what places us in a great place to keep climbing and fully recover beyond our success in 2019. So what's the end of the story that started with burning of $100 million of cash a day? After losing $15 billion in 2020, we are now generating positive cash flow. And last week, we announced our first quarter of profit, which was over $200 million since the fourth quarter of 2019. We could not have done it without the outstanding performance of our 75,000 employees who day in, day out, even in the face of a mysterious virus that nobody knew anything about, ensure that we provide an on-time, enjoyable, safe experience to our hundreds of thousands of customers every day. Thank you for your time. Again, it's my honor to be here to honor John Matheson, and I think we have time for a few questions, I hope. So, thank you.